that data gap or the skilled laborers gap just keeps broadening. And it's not just what everybody thinks laborers, operators, foremen, superintendents, it's project engineers, project managers, designers, developers. Everybody is becoming less skilled. That means the problems that we're seeing on the job site continue to exponentially climb.
Hey, everyone. Thanks for listening to another episode of Buildings 2.0, a podcast highlighting the voices shaping our built environment. My guest today, Chris Faulhaber, Director of Digital Transformation at EarthBrain. Chris is a professional engineer, spent his career running Earthmoving job sites before he ran technology behind him. Today, he leads digital transformation at EarthBrain. The venture Komatsu spun up to digitize the whole earth-moving process. He's got a pointed take on where the waste on jobs actually lie. He says it's not a time problem at all, and this is where I want to get into it. So, Chris, thanks for joining.
Thanks for having me.
You know, in our pre-interview, you mentioned Skynet is being built, and you had one word, AI. What's keeping you awake right now? Are you a believer? Are you concerned? Where are you at?
Well, it's probably, again, and you'll find this answer quite often, it's a little bit of both. I enjoy AI in my personal life. It helps me be much more efficient in terms of what I'm doing and tasks that I'm trying to accomplish, whether it's providing summaries, whether it's helping me gather some of the information I need to make a decision. My fear, though, is that it's now become that easy button and everybody is relying on AI to now tell them everything. And the information coming out of AI is the absolute truth. And I think we're grasping onto that because while I mentioned in some of my LinkedIn posts that it's really not a time problem, but it is a time problem for some people that haven't embraced some of this digitization, digital transformation, and they're at the very beginning of that journey. So now AI is that way that they're planning on doing it. Unfortunately, I think they're going to continue along the journey and go, I implemented some stuff that was probably not right for me way back when, just because I didn't know what I didn't know. And now that I do, I'm having to backtrack and really try to find and regain some of that efficiency that I've lost.
Give us a peek into your kind of front row seat. What are the kinds of projects you and the team are working on?
Yeah, so we're trying to really take these customers through a digital journey. I think you had mentioned, Jose, that you've got a lot of experience in vertical building with your architecture background. The vertical building industry seems to have really grasped onto these technologies quite actually readily and efficiently and implemented them almost in their day-to-day routines. On the heavy civil earth moving side, maybe not so much, partly because moving dirt itself hasn't changed over maybe 20 to 30 years, but the amount of data that is now generated today and the ability to make decisions is so much further along, even much further along than when I was back running projects myself. So what we were trying to do is really step people through that journey, trying to figure out where their inefficiencies are. Because you probably heard this even in back when you were doing all this, but every contractor finds themselves and they describe themselves as unique. And they have to, because what they are doing is unique to them. What they are doing broadly is very common. So while they have their ways of working, we can still take those and make those very efficient.
What does that look like? So you mentioned moving dirt hasn't changed in 20, 30 years. What does it look like today?
Yeah, so it looks like we've got better equipment. They're more fuel efficient. Of course, they have, to the angst of probably a lot of my earth moving colleagues, the tier 4 and dash and particulate filters, those kinds of things. So the machines themselves have gotten a lot better. The concept of picking up the dirt in this location and moving it over to that location and the site all of a sudden not balancing, those kind of problems we have been experiencing for a lot of time. Now, what's really changed, as I mentioned, is the amount of data that we can generate now, because the machines themselves have not only gotten more efficient, more productive, they actually generate significantly more data today than they did maybe 20 to 30 years ago, and even like a decade ago when we really started seeing all of this data being accumulated and being used beyond just you work this many hours, you burn this much fuel. Now it can actually tell you where it was at. It can provide even truck bed tonnage, so we know how much material we're moving. The problem, though, is we really haven't caught up on the office side. So while we're generating significantly more data in the field, we're not utilizing that data to make the day-to-day decisions that make us more profitable. We're still relying on people that have been doing this for 20, 30 years. And as you probably see this in the architecture realm as well, that data gap or the skilled laborers gap just keeps broadening. And it's not just what everybody thinks. Laborers, operators, foremen, superintendents, it's project engineers, project managers, designers, developers. Everybody is becoming less skilled. That means the problems that we're seeing on the job site continue to exponentially climb.
When I hear about digitization, you think of industries like finance has been pretty digitized, text, images, video, media, money, all that. Earth is probably the last thing I think about in terms of digitization. I'll use dirt. What does it actually look like? You mentioned folks on the site actually have better tooling today. What does it mean to digitize dirt moving? What take us in the front row.
Yeah, so Jose, I think that's a very fantastic question because that's probably, as people are listening to this podcast or even think about digital transformation, you're absolutely right. They look at it like, oh, yeah, well, I can digitize my money flowing around because, that's banks and everybody else talking to each other. But how do I digitize dirt? It's actually pretty simple. And we've seen this happen over the last decade. I would say drone survey is becoming far more prevalent even today than it was 5 years ago. And that's a very fantastic, quick, and easy way for us to understand what does our job site look like today. So that first real key step is actually understanding what does our job site look like today and what does it need to look like tomorrow or next week or next month. So utilizing those two key pieces of information are how we can make a ton of decisions. And it starts by getting a good design, and it starts by implementing machine control technology. And then it starts by digitization of the job site, whether that's with drones, whether that's with handheld LiDAR scanners. They used to do some of these larger projects by plane, but the drone technology has gotten so good over the last 5, 6, well, really even about the last 8, 9 years, that it's so easy to digitize your job site, understand what you've actually accomplished, and then make that decision to either stop the bleeding or keep in the green running.
I'm a novice when it comes to this sector. Talk to me about like the economics of dirt moving. Like how do you differentiate yourself as a firm, as a business, especially in the age of AI? Like how do you, of course, the uses of technology and streamlining, but what are the fundamental economics around the business model?
Yeah, and I think that's another great question, Jose. And you heard me make that comment of I'm unique, right? The reason why a lot of our customers say that is because a lot of their processes are unique, and the way that they do move the material in terms of going from point A to point B is actually what gets them jobs. A lot of the economics of earth moving are pretty simple. It's how many dollars per cubic yard is this going to take to build this project? Now, this is where that unique comes in, because if I am experienced in the way of doing this, then I can sequence it in a way that really makes it extremely efficient. And then all of a sudden, my dollars per cubic yard start to go down and I'm beating my competition. And it's really easy to do when you've got a good set of plans, they're designed well, and actually what you're building in the field is what you anticipated building in the field. Now, that rarely happens anymore. I think you mentioned this in terms of our pre-show chat, and that a lot of the information's outdated. And that's absolutely correct, because as we get this skilled laborers gap, we don't have the people gathering the information anymore. So they're now designing jobs very quickly because we can't build enough homes and we can't do enough subdivisions. So even the designers are really behind schedule, and they're using data that's 15, 20 years old in some case, or they're pulling up Google Earth and they're trying to grab existing ground data from Google Earth. What this is now telling us is that the data that we've got is kind of okay. It's more than likely wrong, and more than likely we're going to have to make a change in the field. So when you talk about the economics, there's the bid economics of the job, what we anticipate that happens, versus the actual economics of what problems did we run into the field, what changes do we need to handle quickly. And that's where digital transformation really comes in, is because it's never does a job actually go the way that it's supposed to, is how quickly can we make that change to get us back on track. Not only that, how can we communicate what's actually happening in the field to the right people so we can make a decision and keep the project moving. That's where I see a real disconnect between the people that are physically doing the job and the people that are making decisions, because those are quite a wide variety of people. And in some cases, when you get into like developers, they may not be in the same town or the same state. Very rarely do you see not in the same country, but getting the right information to them to make a decision is really hard. And largely the economics of a job site come down to trust. How much do I trust what the contractor's telling me? How much do I trust what they're building in the field is correct, and how do I continue that trust? So you definitely see in the private side of the business a lot of that trust being built, and then that's why that contractor and that developer in particular work so well together.
Is there a particular story, maybe a project that stands out to you? Going back to what you're mentioning there about trust, some project that stood out to you is like, this is an example of how it should be.
Yeah, so we get that a lot when contractors have worked with their owners for a number of years. I've got a contractor here in Salt Lake that I've worked with quite a bit over the last 10 years, and they've built tremendous trust with their owner. And they started flying drones very early on. And so what they started doing was utilizing the ortho image that was coming off the drone to communicate issues and problems and then even propose resolutions. So they were getting very quick turnaround in terms of decisions, change orders, and they're able to keep their schedule and keep moving forward. That's a really good example of how the contractor and how the owner can collaborate digitally to really make those decisions. Now, on the flip side, we've seen where it's just like, hey, I can't even put this dirt where it's supposed to be. And more or less the owner comes back, or even the site representative says, well, yeah, you can just put it over there. I don't understand what's your problem. And then they have to go to the hood of the truck. They've got to pull out the plans. They've got to say, well, this is why this doesn't work. And they spend a lot of time just arguing back and forth, just trying to make a decision as simple as that grade isn't going to work. This is how we should adjust it. And let's build the project this way. So you can see the stark contrast between the way that it should work with high collaboration, digital imagery, being able to understand the project and collaborate versus everything being contentious and fighting over what's actually happening on the job site.
Yeah. You're alluding to this obviously with communication, but if you could kind of wave your wand right now and kind of set up a project for success, are there specific things that you would ask contractors to stop doing, or perhaps, areas that you're misunderstood? Like what would you change if you could have it your way?
Yeah, I would say to a contractor, you're unique, but not as unique as you think. So be open and honest with who you're working with, and be willing to share information back and forth. Now, I do say that a little bit tongue in cheek because information is still a stick that you can get beat with. So you've got to be able to develop that trust and just kind of be open and honest. I think that's where a lot of projects fall apart, is where everybody tries to hold too much to their chest. And instead of kind of coming out there and really approaching things with a collaborative attitude, it becomes contentious right away.
Right. It's a saying that my old architecture professor would remind us, that you're all unique and all in the same ways there. What are things that contractors believe they're unique in, and when in reality it's like a very common, what's a common thing?
Yeah, I would say largely I don't know if I could boil it down to one thing, but largely the way that you're going to move the dirt is probably the same way someone else is going to move the dirt. So that part of it's not unique. I think where the uniqueness really comes in is how you're classifying it and how you're tying the sequential part of it together. So being able to look at a project as a whole versus a bunch of individual tasks, I think, are what separates a really good contractor versus somebody that's just in it to make money.
Yeah. 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 Earlier you're alluding to this kind of like K-shaped graph, where on the one hand, AI seems to be kind of spiking in its use and use cases, whereas on the other, you have kind of the labor force seemingly struggling to kind of replace itself, leading us to make speculations about, is the job site going to need more autonomy and autonomous robots, things like that? You're on the front lines of this. Like, what's the reality? Like, I'm sure we see kind of like the sci-fi and the Teslas and the figure companies of the world building these humanoids, and there's this excitement around robots dealing with the job sites. What's the reality? Like, what are you saying?
And it's funny you say that, Jose, because I was telling you that I was in back to back to back to back meetings today, and
Yeah.
the meeting I was coming out of was a discussion on autonomy and how does autonomy fit into the job site. Yeah, I don't know if I have a quick and dirty answer, because when you do talk to contractors today, they do talk about wanting to adopt autonomy. But I don't think it's out of desire. I think it's out of necessity. Going back to, we can't find the people to backfill our 20-year veteran that we've got that's been running these projects, and we just don't see that loyalty in terms of companies that we used to see back in the day, of where I would wear a big company logo across my chest, and in fact some people have even gotten like their company tattoos back in the day, and you just don't see that today because everybody's trying to figure out, where do I fit in, how can I make the most money, and all of that. So I think when you talk to contractors today, a lot of that discussion on AI is out of necessity. I think they would actually prefer to continue to have people behind the wheel, because again, there's things AI just can't do yet. Once Skynet is, of course, fully launched, AI can do a lot of things. But in that interim, I think they still want to rely on people. They still want to have the conversation. We've got to really attract the younger audience. Construction itself, particularly heavy civil construction, it's hot, it's dirty, there's a lot of long days, but it's also extremely rewarding, because at the end of the day, you get to look back and you get to say, yeah, I had a hand in building that. That was something that I worked on. That job was a real challenge, but we got through it, and look at how nice this project actually turned out. I think those are the things that really get missed when we talk about recruiting. Now, where I think AI is going, or not AI, but AI in a sense of autonomous, I think where it's going is you're going to start seeing that really pop up on the construction job site within the next 5 to 10 years. And I think it's going to have to kind of figure out its way. I mean, eventually, I'm not sure how old you are, Jose, but eventually it'll be like the Jetsons. And one episode, I always remember, it's George Jetson sitting in his tower, and he's just sitting there pushing a button, and that's all he's doing all day. And he goes, man, these 8-hour work weeks are really killing me. And you see buildings popping up, and 3 and 4 days. I think we'll get to a point where we've got something like that on the job site,
Yeah.
but I just don't think autonomy will ever be able to pick up where the job site changes, or where we run into unexpected soil conditions, or where a buried utility from the 50s was never marked, and all of a sudden we hit that and we've got everything else going on. So I think it's going to take a lot of like what we see in terms of the repetitive jobs, but you're going to still need those frontline people that are out there building and creating these wonderful projects that we all see.
Yeah. What are the kinds of projects that get you most excited?
I really like some of the complicated stuff.
Yeah.
I'm an engineer by trade, I think, and
Yeah.
so again, I apologize to the audience if some of my answers are getting much too long-winded or too
You're
detailed,
good.
but
You're good. This is great.
I like the challenging stuff. Problem solving is one of the things that really drives me. So when I see a project that's really complicated, it's going to require a lot of work, a lot of collaboration, really a lot of decisions that need to be made in a short period of time. Those kind of things are really exciting. The mundane of, hey, I've built 10 of these projects before. Those aren't quite what drives me or gets me out of bed, but it's still really satisfying to look back and say, man, yeah, we built another subdivision, we built another highway, we've really connected and made people's lives better. And that's something maybe in my youth I didn't quite appreciate, but looking back on things over time, definitely those were the types of projects that were really fun.
To a young Chris coming into the industry, now having the benefit of hindsight and your experience, what would you say to a young Chris coming in, and any advice on either the hard skills, kind of being an engineer, in 2026, as well as maybe some of the soft skills?
Yeah, I would say some of the way that I approached it back early on in my career. You're never too good to pick up a shovel. No job is beneath you. Really learn how things happen and why they happen. a way that may be different than you're looking. And it's one thing that I encourage my teams all the time is just be curious. Figure out why we're doing things a certain way, why things are designed a certain way, why can't we try something else? Because I think that curiosity drives a lot of the innovation and a lot of your understanding that eventually it'll just build up on. It's just quite amazing how like my career has really just kind of continued to stack on itself, and I would have never imagined where I'm at today versus even where I was 25, 30 years ago.
On the soft skills side, would you say, well, you were mentioning, right, that the teams are kind of getting leaner, and which presumably might mean that there may be a gap between the folks that have been in the industry for some time and maybe the folks just coming out of school now might find it more difficult because it might, or at least what you're seeing in different sectors is that these kind of like entry level jobs, there's just
Mm.
fewer opportunities. What should a kid coming out of school kind of be thinking about? How should they be positioning themselves?
Yeah, that one's a really tough question because I'm just old enough to where I'm starting to not understand the generations anymore. And I know when I came out and started work 25 years ago, that yeah, it still had a lot of that older generation, and I think that that blending and understanding on the job site of the older and the younger generation is probably a lot of where we struggle at today, because it's not just the fact that it's a dirty industry, it's hot, it's dusty. You do have a lot of that mentality of, if I just yell harder, people will work faster. That definitely doesn't work. Now, I can say for the younger generation that's coming into the job site today, is the job today is much easier than it was 25 years ago. We've got wonderful things on the machines now that actually help you operate them better. You still have to understand what you're doing in terms of building the jobs, but the tools that are available today are much better than they were 25 years ago. So that part of the industry is always going to change. And the younger generation can really help accelerate that change by grasping onto this technology, adopting it, showing how some of the older hands, how having this information and making changes and understanding the data and utilizing all of the everything that's on the job site, not just the skilled labor, can actually make us more money, and it can build the project better. And at the end of the day, we get what everybody wants. The contractor makes a lot of money. The developer gets a great job with high quality, and ultimately we can continue to build on the lives we've already got today.
Chris, this has been so much fun, and I think a great primer for an industry that I'm just kind of getting to understand, and one that you've been in for about 25 years. So I trust this is hopefully the first of several conversations. For those that want to follow you, follow your own journey, work with you, where do they find you?
Yeah, largely I spend a lot of time on LinkedIn. Well, that seems to be about all the time I have these days is on LinkedIn. You can just there's not many Chris Faulhabers on there, so go ahead and search for that. More than likely, I'm going to be on there. I am currently taking people through about a 10-week journey. I'm in week 5 in terms of what does digital transformation mean to your heavy civil construction company. So please look at my posts. I'm going to be putting a lot more articles on there, just trying to help the industry evolve in the way that I know it needs to, so it can be highly profitable, it can be productive, and we can all have the houses, roads, and highways that we all need to live.
Amazing. Chris, thanks so much.
All right, thank you.